Welcome to the Rusted Garden Homestead. This video is all about getting your tomato plants off to a great start. We're going to go over about 10 tips. Use the timestamps to jump to the parts that you want to watch. Please subscribe. I'll be going over how you tend and care for tomato plants over the season. I'll show you how to grow an entire vegetable garden. So let's get started with some basics. You want to get your plants off to a great start. Vigorous plants, strong plants, they're going to lead to a better harvest. This plant is a Juliet. It was put in the ground on 5/3. Today is 5/21. So this has been in the ground, 18 days. All my plants that I'm showing you went in as transplants. 18 days later from going into the ground, the plant looks beautiful. Large green leaves, just starting to flower. Everything about this plant is just right. Lots of new leaves coming. This is what you want your transplants to look like. There's no point in rushing them out into cold soil because they're not going to take off like this. The tomato plants in this section went into the ground on May 10th. That's about 7 days after the one you just saw. So these have been in the ground for let's say 11 days real quick. They look beautiful, nice and stocky. Suckers are starting to come out. They're production stems. I will show you how to manage those so that you get fruit off of them, but they look beautiful. So the first thing you want to do is think about growing your transplants. The transplants right there are in 2.5-inch pots. The plants are tall and thin. They look pretty good. The plants over here are in larger pots. The whole key for transplants is you want beautiful root systems. When you put a tomato plant into the ground, if you have a tiny little root system, it's going to sit there and wait until the root system gets large enough to support the canopy. A canopy or the green growing in your house or in maybe a greenhouse, they're kind of babied. And they do fine, and they get to a size. Once they get outside and the sun is pounding down on them and it's pulling water out of this system and the plant is activated, they really need a stronger root system to really grow, a beautiful canopy like that. Now these plants are all the same age. I put these into the ground for my collection of transplants. The first thing I want to talk about is you want to grow your transplants in larger containers, 2.5-inch containers, 3-inch containers. You want a large root system. Let's see if I can pull this out real quick. You want it to look something like this. Starting to fill out the entire container. This is a little bit root bound, and you would just loosen this up. We'll go over the basic planting hole, but I just loosen up the root ball when I'm going to go and plant my tomato. We'll talk about depth of planting in a second. Your tomato transplants only need to be 4 to 8 weeks old. I'm now more in the camp of a tomato transplant that is 4 weeks old, 6 weeks old is perfect for getting it into the ground. The key is not the size of the tomato transplant, but the warmth of the soil. And we'll talk about that as the second tip in a second. You want to get your tomato transplants in the ground before they start to flower. Definitely before they start producing fruit. If you're getting lots of flowers and you have fruit forming, that tomato plant is just too old. Yes, you can save it, but when you get it into the ground, it's going to be sort of like a bonsai plant to start until that root system catches up to it. I would recommend removing the fruits and the flowers, and you just have to spend more time kind of getting that tomato plant off to a great start in your garden. And there's no reason to really grow these 8 weeks, 10 weeks indoors. You get a taller, thinner plant, great, that's fine. We're going to plant it to about, a depth of something like this. But again, you have to wait for that root system to catch up. And why I am really stressing the root system is a lot of us don't think about that. We just want this big, massive upper plant, tiny little root system. We get it into the ground, and then we wonder why the plant's not taking off. And they'll correct themselves and they'll do okay. The next thing that's important, first of all, keeping the plant 4 to 6 weeks old as a transplant, is to put them into the ground when the soil temperature is right. You can rush out plants that you've had growing 6, 8, 10 weeks into cold soil, like in April here in Maryland. I'm in Maryland Zone 7. And the plants are just going to sit there. The soil is too cold. The plant might even turn purple-ish, and it's just going to struggle. It's kind of just shivering. You want the top 2, 4, 6 inches of your soil to be 60 degrees Fahrenheit. That's about 15.5 Celsius. You want that warmth. The warmth is what gives the plant the signal at the root system to really start growing. It feels the warmth, the roots start growing, everything takes off. And again, this plant, nice and stocky, growing well, no flowers, beautiful leaves, and it really looked like one of these plants 11 days ago. That's 11 days growth in the right soil temperature, and he's got into the ground on 5/10. How do you figure out when your soil temperature is 60 degrees? It doesn't have to be a perfect 60, and we're just talking about that top 2, 4, 6 inches. You're really waiting for the nights to be in the upper 50s, the days getting up into the 70s, getting rains when the temperatures are in the 60s. That will give that top 2 inches a boost in temperature. And about 60 degrees, tomato plants love it. They're gonna, go into the ground and they're gonna look beautiful. This one looks really good. This is all new growth up here. So, timing wise, the first 2 tips are really about timing. You don't want your tomato transplants to be overgrown. You don't want them to be stressed. They should definitely look green, not have flowers, not have flowers or any fruit on there, and they should get into the ground when the temperatures are 60 degrees. That will make all the difference. Rushing them out sooner just creates more work for you. The tomato plant just isn't going to thrive and take off. It's going to wait for the right temperatures, so you might as well plant into the temperatures the tomato plants want. The next step is really getting the plants ready to be transplanted, and you want to remove some of the bottom growth and just clean up the stem. You can plant these to like 1/3 the depth of the plant, or the size of the plant. So maybe we'll plant this one to about there, or 1/4 or something like that. We'll plant this one to about there. The roots, the root ball, of course, you want to loosen them up, get the roots going in a different direction, and this guy's ready for planting. You could take this one off too. These are going to be the roots that go deeper into the ground. By moving up the stem, you're pushing the root ball deeper into the ground, which means the moisture is going to stay there longer. And these will grow into the ground. Shallow roots will they don't come out along the entire stem, but they'll come out right about where you bury them, and they're going to send out all the surface roots. So the key here really is, this guy really has a small root system. The roots are constrained. You want to give them a good 7 to 10 days to start growing and spread out. By putting it down deeper into the ground, moisture is going to stay around here more, and that's really important, because when the tomato goes into the ground, being hit by sun like it is today, it's really going to quickly pull all the moisture out from around the root ball, and the roots only come out to here. So even if the garden is soaked out here, it doesn't have a big enough root system to support vigorous growth. So we plant it down a little bit deeper. It gets the deep roots, it gets the shallow roots. The next thing that you want to do is really water this every other day, just right at the root ball, making sure this stays nice and moist for a good 7 to 10 days. The tomato root system is going to go out really quickly when that temperature of the soil is in that 60 degrees, and the root system will get massive enough to really start, the vigorous growth, so that your tomato plant looks like this. And this is just 11 days later. Every other day you're going to water just right here. Make sure the moisture's there. Do that, 7, 10, 14 days. It's really up to you. Depends on how much it rains and what's going on with your temperatures. That will get your plants off to a beautiful start. This is the basic planting hole I use in my garden. You're going to see this in different videos because the basic setup is the same. I'd like to dig the hole about 10 inches deep, 12 inches deep at the most. That's 25 to 30 centimeters deep. 10 inches wide, 25 centimeters wide, something close to that. Doesn't have to be perfect. The whole idea is that you're just digging out a hole, you're prepping the soil. Once you dig it out to the depth, you definitely want to get in, loosen up the bottom. Helps the root system just grow deeper, depending on what you're growing. And then you're going to add your basic ingredients. I like the planting hole because if this was a brand new bed, I don't have to amend and spend money taking care of this entire bed. I can just, set it up, put in a planting hole 1, 2, 3, 4 maybe for 4 tomatoes, or like over there I have cucumbers, 1, 2 for cucumbers. It lets me just focus the resources where they're needed for this year. Nature will take care of the rest of the bed. It's a way to save some money. Filling the hole. Now, if you have tons of compost, you can just go with compost. You're going to fill that at least halfway with the compost. This is my compost. This is made from leaves. It's absolutely beautiful. And generally speaking, I would just put most of that in there, mix it through, put in my plant. but we're going to be in different points in our gardens with what resources we have available. You can use peat moss. The whole idea is that you're giving nutrients to this hole, and you're also creating a place where moisture is going to stay. That's really important, like I was saying, for the root systems. Now, you could replace peat moss with coco coir. They both impact the environment, and you just have to decide which one you want to use. If you have endless compost, certainly just use compost. But I would fill the hole about halfway with the peat moss or halfway with the compost. If you're using both, you know, a quarter of each or something like that. That is a great addition to really set this hole up. Now, you can go ahead, put in any organic granular fertilizer. This bag is a 27-pound bag that I got on sale years ago for under, let's just say under $5, which is ridiculous. You want to put in 1 or 2 tablespoons of any organic granular fertilizer. That's a slow release, and then you just want to mix everything through. You're not going to plant directly into that. Slowly add in some soil and just blend it together really well. And then you can kind of backfill in the rest of the soil. You have your basic planting hole set up, and then for the tomato plant or whatever you're growing, I would just come over, dig it out, set it to the depth I went. And remember, the tomato plants are doing, you know, a quarter depth of the entire stem or a third of the depth. You drop in your plant, backfill around there, and then you go ahead and you water it in. In this case, one of the tips is using a water-soluble nitrogen, or I'm sorry, a water-soluble fertilizer, higher in nitrogen, to get the plant off to a great start. But you're going to water it in, your plant is good to go. You can also do this with seeds. So since this video is going to show up in other places, you could set up the hole just like I showed you, and then if you're putting in cucumber seeds or zucchini seeds, you're going to thin to the strongest zucchini plant. You just drop it in like that. The root systems grow into a great, basically the great planting hole. It's all set up for the plants. Root systems love it. They get really strong, and they really add to great growth of your transplants, or seeds in this case. So let's pretend that we just planted these, and remember, we're setting them up, loosening up the root ball, planting them to a quarter or a third of the entire length of the stem. They're in the ground. I've already fed these. You don't want to overfeed your plants. There's no need to give them more than they need. They're just going to grow excessive leaves, which looks good, but that can be a problem down the line with insects because the leaves get too thin and it's just too much lush growth. Slow and steady is the best way to feed your plants. So if we just put them in, let's pretend that this is a water-soluble fertilizer. Today it's just water. I like using AgroThrive. I'm affiliated with them. They're a wonderful company, great organic product. You can find information about that in the video description. So since it does have that small root ball, we're just watering right at the base. If that was liquid fertilizer, I'd go, you know, something like this, and that is a great start for the plant. It's got water-soluble nitrogen. Water-soluble means the nutrients are going to be immediately available to this. So nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, the plant can use right away and develop its roots, its leaves, all of its systems. The organic granular, it's going to take time to break down with soil biology, microbiology, so that's going to feed over the months. The compost is ready to go now. The peat or coir or compost that you put in there is going to hold water, going to keep the roots surrounded with moisture, and that's exactly what you want to do. That gets your plants off to a wonderful start. The watering, as I was saying before, because it's small root balls, basically the size of those containers, you're going to want to water every other day, every second day, third day, depending on, you know, what the weather's like. And you want to do that for a good 7, 10, 14 days. That will get your plants established and you'll be happier for it, you know, down the line. The next thing I want to talk about is staking your tomato. When you first put the plant in, it's really the best time to put in your post. You want at least 6-foot posts. These are indeterminate tomatoes. They're going to keep growing, you know, for the entire season. And I'm going to be training them up the post. And again, if you want to subscribe, I'll show you how to single stem prune, double stem prune your tomatoes, let them go, do a method where I let actually the suckers grow out of the joint, flower, and then I top off the suckers. This way you're getting the fruit, but you're not getting this additional large vine. But that's all for future videos. Put in the stake now, because if you wait too long and the root systems go out, and the way that they branch, if you put the post in too close to the tomato, you can damage a lot of the roots. It's not going to kill the tomato plant, but it could slow it down. So get your stakes in now. You definitely want to stake them. It helps with the management of pests and disease, and in future videos we'll be doing bottom pruning, removing the lower leaves, and just trying to keep the plant in its best shape possible so it gets less diseases, less insect damage, and all that. The next tip I want to talk about is what I call the aspirin trick. Aspirin, it has to be aspirin. Salicylic acid, I believe off the top of my head, is the main ingredient in aspirin, or acetylsalicylic acid. But anyway, just trust me, it's salicylic acid. That compound mimics a hormone in a tomato plant that causes a response to beef up defenses. It thickens the leaves, may make them look even a little bit darker, and that response is normally triggered when disease comes in and damages the leaves, or insects come in and start damaging the leaves. It naturally puts out the SAR response, which again, systemic acquired resistance, I believe. I didn't write it down, so I'm pulling it out of memory. But it's the SARS response. You can trick the tomato plant into thinking something bad is happening, so it beefs up its defenses by using 325 milligrams of aspirin. You want uncoated aspirin because the coating will mess up your watering container. You just throw in 1 tablet into a gallon of water, dissolve it through, and then you can water your plants in. Watering them in has them contact the aspirin. That triggers the response, and you're again going to notice darker leaves, thicker leaves. They get a little bit leathery. It's just a beefed up tomato waiting for to defend itself from a problem that hasn't arrived yet. So that helps, generally speaking, mostly fight off fungal issues. I really like using it. It does make a difference. Now, you can also go back to the planting hole and just drop in a whole aspirin, a 325 milligram aspirin, maybe 6 inches deep. That's 15 centimeters deep. Just let it sit in there. Every time you water, it's going to dissolve. It's going to seep into the root system. If you put the aspirin right into the planting hole, the plants are good for a good 60 days. If you're watering on the aspirin every 3 to 4 weeks works. You don't have to do it any sooner than that. You can if you want to. You can't hurt your plant with the aspirin, but I wouldn't go really past 4 weeks. You would do that regularly every 3 to 4 weeks as the tomato plant grows, or until you're comfortable feeling like maybe they've gone through the cycle when all the diseases are around. But it really does make a difference. I do recommend it. There's some studies saying it can help eggplant and pepper plants. I've never used it for that, but it definitely works, in my opinion, on the tomato plants. An experiment. Do half your tomato plants, see if you notice a change in the leaves and how the plant responds to having aspirin poured on it. Now, aspirin technically isn't organic. It's just a little tiny 325 milligram pill. You're not wrecking your garden. If you want, you can go find willow bark. You can soak it. You can pull out the same type of compound from the willow bark, pour it on there, but that's a lot of work. When it comes to organic growing, you want to be thinking about what you're doing mostly. I'm always using I'm always using compost, which is really the truth of what organic gardening is about, is using compost. And I'm very particular with what goes onto my plants. I'm not 100% organic, but I can tell you an aspirin is not going to wreck your organic garden if you choose to use that. I wanted to talk a little bit more about watering. We tend to underwater our gardens for some reason. There's that thing going on the internet where it says 1 to 2 inches of water per week. That's not really enough water. It's enough water for your tomato plants and other plants to survive, but you want them to thrive. So we did cover, the initial watering for the first 7 to 14 days when you first put your transplants in. But once they're established, and even 18 days later, these are established. You want to water at this stage when they're, this size, it's just starting to warm up, at least every 3 to 4 days. A nice, good soaking. Water is what helps move all the nutrients into the plant system through the roots. They can survive on less water, but you want these plants to be beautiful. You want them to thrive. So I do recommend watering a little more than you think. And it's, a good 5 seconds just up and around here, certainly at the base if they're new, but getting them out and around the whole space, because that's where the surface roots are going. And the surface roots pull in a lot of the nutrients. They pull in a lot of the moisture. Steady, even watering also helps prevent blossom end rot, helps prevent fruit cracking. So at this stage, May 21st, you know, every 3 days or so, at least twice a week, maybe 3 times a week. When we get into the heat of the summer, middle of June, late June, early July, these plants are 4 feet tall. You may be watering every other day just to keep them going and keep them thriving. Now, it's going to vary depending on how much rain you want, but what I want to leave upon you for this tip is just water a little bit more frequently than you think. You can't really overwater in earth beds, and you can't really overwater in containers if they have drainage. Just don't skimp on the water, and you're going to really notice a difference in the production of your garden. Mulching ties right in with moisture management. And I like using shredded hardwood. There's grass down under here. A good, inch of mulch keeps the moisture in the soil. And you're going to have surface roots of these tomato plants and other plants going all over the place. The mulch also protects the plants from the sun, believe it or not. As the sun gets hotter, like in the beginning, we don't necessarily want mulch. We want the sun to be warming up the soil. But as the sun is, becoming the summer sun, it's getting into the 80s, the sun beating down on here can really heat that soil up to 90, 100 degrees or even hotter, the top, inch or two. That can shut your tomato down. It also pulls out a tremendous amount of water. So if you want to increase the watering so that your plants do better, you can decrease the frequency of that watering, even though, I just said to up it, by using mulch. By putting the mulch down, you really greatly reduce evaporation from the sun, and it keeps the moisture in there. So you have to water less, Again, still more than you might think, but with mulch, the chore is a little bit easier. And maybe put down an inch. I like shredded hardwood. This will decay and break down over time. Sitting on the surface, it's not going to impact or damage your plants. If you mix wood through the soil, it can interfere with how the plant pulls nitrogen in. About an inch of mulch, your plant is set up. You could use grass. If you use green grass, you put down about an inch or so, let it dry, turn brown, you can put down more. You can use anything for mulch, but I do really recommend it. Keeps the moisture in there, protects it from the hot sun as summer approaches, the high heat of summer approaches. Mulch really makes a big difference, and it cuts down on the weeds. But these plants look, they're beautiful, and they are again 18 days into growing from being a transplant. And the final tip is to really start thinking about prevention. If it's your first garden, you may not know what pests and disease come to the garden. So as you notice problems in a journal, just write down, X problem. That's going to help you next year, because prevention is really about starting 2 weeks before you notice the problems arrive in your garden and setting up a treatment plan, basically. And it could be sprays, it could be dusts, it could be anything that really affects the problem that's coming. Sometimes it's insects, sometimes it's a fungal issue. So you want to start collecting the data now to know what comes to your garden. You want to inspect your tomato plants every couple of days, because a fungal issue can spread really quickly. If you catch it sooner, you're going to be able to manage it a lot more. And again, subscribe. I'll teach you how to use hydrogen peroxide, different antifungals, and just take care of plants as issues come up. You can see, if you have good eyes, a little bit of dust down there. I had flea beetles on my plant, so I put down some spinosad. That got them under control. They don't typically appear. Our weather's been odd, so I noticed the holes. I noticed the flea beetles, so I put down some dust, rinsed it off in the morning. That's, what's left behind. I don't like leaving dust on. Organic, not organic, doesn't matter. A dust will kill any kind of insect, so it can kill the good insects too. So I put it on in the evening, wash it off early in the morning, takes care of the problem. The whole key to success in your tomato plants and other garden vegetables is anticipating and learning what the problems are, and really setting up a prevention routine that starts about 2 weeks before the plants arrive, or before the pests and the diseases arrive. Fungal issues can be sitting on your leaves for a good 7 to 10 days. You can't see the spores or anything like that. So by starting a couple weeks early, you're cleaning up and you're getting rid of the problem before they start to appear on the leaves. Thanks so much for watching. Please check out my seed shop at therustedgarden.com, and please subscribe. I'm trying to get to 750,000 subscribers. I'll also show you how to take care of a garden, start to finish. I do all of my videos sort of in real time, so as I'm doing something, if you're similar to Maryland Zone 7, you can follow along. These are some other tomato plants set up just like I showed you. They're off to a beautiful start. Nice and dark green, the stems are getting thick, the leaves look beautiful, and that's what you want. These 10 tips will help you get your tomato plants off to a great start, you can use the same setup for peppers, tomatoes, cucumbers, etc. with respect to the planting hole. Again, thanks for watching.